So my name is Shiva. Full name is Shiva Kumar Viswanathan, and I am a qualified graphic designer. So I have actually worked for quite a few interesting clients in these 25 years. I'm actually giving you some of the stuff that I've done in the last few years, or the companies that I worked with in the last few years, is with Ogilvy and with Brand Union. We've worked with Lenovo, IBM, Dell, Harman, and also Titan for quite a bit of projects that we have done for them. And we've actually done quite a bit of stuff in the startup arena, Big Basket. And we had worked with Myntra at the early point of time. And of course, before it actually became the Myntra which it is today, which is now like sells everything. At that point of time, they were trying to customize products to sell. That's how they started. And then there is a fabulous small startup that is kind of growing quite rapidly called Scriptbox, the brand and the entire user experience for that. The last piece of user experience that we did with the Ether design is Acadgild itself, right? So the new change in Acadgild that you see from a brand perspective and the entire user experience is done by us. We have actually worked across multiple. I've personally been involved in projects that's right across devices, right? So, I mean, of course, it started with desktops and standard PCs like browser-based and non-browser-based applications. Then, of course, we did a couple of projects which are for television and set-top boxes. Welcome to the user experience design. I'm going to walk you through a quick introduction. You know, why do we need to know about user experience design? And I want to actually, what's on screen a bit, forget about it a bit, and I want to talk about the idea of experiences, right? Like, so constantly people say that life is made of a whole bunch of experiences that are kind of interestingly mature a person or makes a person knowledgeable, right? So, there used to be an economy that is based on basic objects, if you know what I mean. So if you actually go and buy a product, you give money and buy the product, right? Like, so that is the economy. And so there was a kind of a business about it, a technology that kind of went around figuring that stuff out. There was the idea of the brand and communication that actually sold that entire piece, and that was what is called as the product-centric economy. And I think it's kind of moved over time. Now the economy is experience-centric. Simple things like there are researches that are being done, and people actually value experiences they go through way more than stuff that they buy. Like, for example, I'm sure if I ask you, would you buy a new bike or a refrigerator, or would you save money and go to a place which gives you an unbelievably new experience? You will trade. You will think a lot before trading one against the other. So, and that experiential piece has become way more important to us because it actually makes memories, and it makes methods in which you can actually keep ideas of benefits and what you gain from these experiences pretty close to your heart, right? The biggest problem is when we actually slap on technology as a conduit for these experiences, in the sense that the first stopover is technology. So imagine a place where somebody thought about a computer, somebody thought about a computer and a person who's got to sit in front of a computer, and there is a method in which he or she has got to interact. We are saying like that, forget screen. We don't even probably know that there is a screen. And it then evolved to an idea of a screen, and then it evolved to an idea of a smaller one, a desktop, a laptop, probably multiple devices, and something as small, probably the smallest possible thing that we use with interactivity and a clear experience is like a smartwatch right now, right? So we've come a long way in this entire experience-based technology bridge that we are building. And the first point that I want to talk about is making technology products approachable and intuitive. We'll talk about this further too, but I believe that usability and user experience and technology products themselves over time have defined a grammar, a method in which you interact. There are a few things that you will search for in the same place, whichever site you go to, or there are a few things that you will expect to be in the same place, whichever app you open. That is the kind of an unsaid syntax, unsaid grammar that is really helping us arrive at a better and better user experience over time. The second thing is that it's great to kind of define experience to a certain extent, but how do you make it cohesive? How do you make it, like, if I actually, what I'm talking about is, like, if there are four specific tasks that you need to do in a website or in an app, how do you make it all feel like it's part of one system, like that is a connected experience? And how do you actually make something so usable, compelling, or desirable? One of the stuff that I keep talking about is the concept of an iPhone. I don't know whether, or a smartphone. I shouldn't even be saying iPhone. The birth of a smartphone, I believe, is a user experience birth. It is the product was born out of better user experience than anything else. It is about ability to combine a bunch of things as a cohesive experience, like put the phone, put a small computer, put a touchable screen that is large enough to watch, put an entertainment console, put music in it, and combine it all as one cohesive experience that is useful, usable, compelling, desirable, like the fancy smartphone that we use today. Like, I don't know whether you had used a feature phone before. I grew up in the feature phone time. Actually, I grew up in no phone time, and then went to the feature phone time, and then to the smartphone. So you can really see the change in the experience of what we get. And now we demand an experience of sort that is of a certain order, and we can't even think of going back to a feature phone, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So the second thing is also from a technology perspective. I mean, like, for example, let's talk about, since it's just you and I, let's talk about Sedura, for example. When you actually come up with an idea like Sedura, when you say that it's going to be an evaluation platform that actually defines the possibilities, or opens up the possibilities of future for a certain set of children, that is actually a non-tangible abstract thought in your head, right? You can do as much as coding as you want, but unless you paint the picture as a usable user experience, people don't get the product very easily. So one of the stuff that user experience does is also very quickly brings the technology team, the business team, and the design team onto the same page when you're actually building a product. Or it doesn't matter whether it's a product or not, building anything which is to do with IT, with technology. And that is something, especially something that is user-based, not necessarily the deep backend. That we are not talking about cloud computing kind of stuff, but especially that is user-based and demonstrable, like where I can actually go in front of 10 people and say, listen, this is how my idea is going to work. So honestly, you don't even need to do a line of code, but you can actually have a prototype that is substantially good enough to bring the business team, the technology team, and the design team or the product team all together very, very quickly. And of course, the last point is that it actually helps to put something that is interactive in front of the user, right? Like, so, which is something that we kind of negate. We actually don't think about the user so much at all. So this actually helps to put something substantially good and something that is high fidelity. What I mean by high fidelity is almost like the product experience itself in front of the user. So that is largely why we need to know about user experience. and who will benefit from the course and how is something that I've been kind of thinking about. And I wanted to keep this stuff a little, importantly, a little unintimidating. Otherwise there is too many jargons, too much stuff that will zap everybody out, and nobody wants to get into it beyond a certain point, right? Like, so my thought is also to have conversations and make it as unintimidating as possible, so that you can step into this world of design very, very easily, right? So actually, I've kind of designed it for two large groups. One is graphic designers, industrial designers, creative directors, art directors, architects. And the other one is product groups, which will come up in the next slide as we go. So if you're really a part of a technology initiative in an enterprise, or a product team in a startup, which is exactly what your profile is really, this will be useful for you for so many reasons, because you can build out the idea very quickly. You can build and put it in front of your users very quickly. You can build it and put it in front of potential investors very quickly, and so on. And also, it helps you use a power of empathy, right? Like, that is something that, don't get me wrong, but technologists don't look at it from that perspective. It's important to kind of perceive like, for example, you got to get into the children/students' mind to understand how your product is going to actually work with them. You got to get into the minds of teachers and people who administer this evaluation that you have, to actually see how it is going to help them, or how unintimidating, easy, helpful, and thoughtful your evaluation is going to be, other than being just a plain evaluation, right? Again, it's an experience. It's going to be emotive. It is going to be guiding them. So it is a lot of power of empathy. There is a lot of humanness that will apply to technology, that will make the technology product way more emotive and interesting and connected than what it is, right? So that is the, of course, creative abilities. And of course, it kind of makes you understand the idea of a brand, like creates a persona. Brand, we'll visit that later, but brand is something that creates a persona. It almost makes something lovable. It makes something like a person, right? So hopefully at one point of time, Sedura will become a substantially large brand that that people will know, understand, and have a feeling about. And that is important, to have a feeling about a brand. So how does that happen? Because most often experience becomes the brand. Like, you will remember Amazon because Amazon actually, people, when I say stuff like people who also bought this, that experience or that feature and functionality, which eventually became an experience, is kind of owned by Amazon in one sense. Now everybody is doing it, but Amazon was the first guys to start it. So it becomes the brand in one sense, right? Of course, one of the other stuff that you will do is constantly bring in the user perspective to your product team. So if you are a part of, it doesn't matter whether it's your own product or you're working in a product company, you will constantly say, do you think this feature, this functionality, this product, this specific module that we are building, is it usable and is it useful for the user at all? Is something that you will constantly question, and you will constantly build kind of emotive use cases of sort, and bring that to the table, right? You will also open new avenues in the career. At some point of time, you might say that you can actually build a product fully by yourself, right? So that is also another thing. So when we go to the next set, this is for the product teams, right? Product managers, tech architects, front-end developers, business analysts, project managers, and tech startup founders. For you, especially, the idea is to kind of learn design thinking. Design thinking is a process that will help you quite a bit, even when you go a little further in your career, even if you go to a managerial level, because everything can be broken down to a process that is actually design thinking design thinking process. It doesn't matter whether it's business, technology, design itself, or anything, something completely new. So that is a part of a product life cycle, is something that you will surely learn in this course, and I will actually guide you guys. Actually, the larger syllabus is kind of fitted out over the design thinking framework itself to make it easy for you to understand this better. And then it will make your technology products way more tangible, clickable, and put in front of people. User perspective and brand experience. We spoke about it. This is specifically for product, the product and the technology team. I broke it into two parts because I thought I should actually talk about creative guys who are in the design field, who are actually trying to move to user experience design, and also people like you who are technology guys, who are mid-tier and front-end developers who want to kind of move very easily into user experience design, right? So this is how we are going to go through this stuff. I'm just quickly going to walk you through the anatomy of the course itself. So if you look at the screen, you will see today we will cover using technology. How are we actually using technology today? And how is it actually changing the method in which we've got to define experiences? Then we will talk about elements of user experience. There's a lot of confusion about what exactly, like some people call it interaction design, some people call it, but actually some people call it visual design, some people call it navigation design, and so on. But actually all these are a part of a huge stack which is actually called user experience design. And we are going to break it down. And this is something that we will probably do over tomorrow. If you can't finish by tomorrow, we'll extend it to the next class too, because it's the most important class. Because that is a kind of a defining piece for the rest of the course. Then we'll talk about empathy as which is supposed to be the most core essence of what we will be doing. Understanding, like the name says, user experience. So it is so important for us to understand the user. Who is the user? And who is the user is not a demographic profile, right? Like, for example, you can't say 25 to 35-year-old in a city and, typically in a college, and leave it at that. It's a behavioral, it's more deeper than a basic demographic. It's a behavioral response. It's literacy of devices and usage. All that is something that we've got to understand, because especially in India, that is so complicated in terms of the demographics. Everybody is not the same, so it's very difficult to stereotype them. And so how do we actually extract the idea of who the user is something that we need to deeply understand. And that's what we will do with empathy. Who is the user? Chapter 4 is product definition. Like, what are we building? And that itself, so based on user, you kind of gathered a bunch of things from the user. How do we build or create a product idea with features and functionality in it that is useful and usable, so that the product is good and used? So one of the stuff that keeps recurring is that, like, most of the IT initiatives and the products fail not because they are bad. They fail because users ditch them after a point of time. It becomes hostile for users to use them unless it is too utilitarian and elementary for you to use it. Like, for example, a mail is impossible for you not to use it anymore once you sign up. It's become a elementary utilitarian stuff. But if you go to a next level of user-based stuff, like, for example, if you take travel, there are X number of options and ability to travel from one place to the other. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about booking. I'm not necessarily talking about modes of transport, right? So given that, I can easily jump from one to the other. But how can I actually make my product specific as an experience that is most interesting And that is what most interesting, useful, usable, and sticky, so that I'll come back again and again to use the product, is what product definition is all about. Chapter 5 is information architecture. It is the basis as it can get, as basic as the foundational element of anything that you build as a user experience, right? So that is kind of defining the hierarchy of information at the ground level so that you can build stuff over it. We'll talk about that in information architecture. Interaction design is to actually make products that are interactive and worthwhile. Chapter 7 is specifically about prototyping. It's ability to kind of, and what does prototyping mean? Prototyping does not necessarily mean complicated, clickable, and technology coded prototypes. We can even have paper prototypes that you put in front of users. We can even have concept prototypes that has got nothing to do with the interface itself, that you can put in front of users. And of course, it leads to the next chapter, which is user testing. You make prototypes because the teams get onto the same page very quickly. And of course, you put it in front of users and get enough feedback so that you can tweak it very quickly. So one of the most important stuff that while you do usability and user experience design is that you are constantly ready to fail fast. So failure is accepted and seen as a stepping stone to go next, rather than seen as as a regressive, as going back. It's never going back. It is about going in front. So that is user testing. Chapter 9 is information and visual design. This is something that is the closest to my heart in one sense, because it is usually ditched completely. So you get a couple of guys and tell them, listen, paint this thing in a good color palette and good typography. Yaar, kuch design kar do usme, kind of stuff. And then you leave them to kind of do a basic visual design. But it's so critical and important, the information design and visual design. How do you actually define hierarchy in a page itself? How do you define hierarchy with typography, color, imagery, and what kind of imagery can you use and what works best? Is it diagrammatic, photographic imagery, or is it going to be a video that indicates something? All that kind of falls in the information and visual design. Chapter 10 is very specifically about content. This is a big deterrent for products to go up in front of the users. Like, we keep this the last and we never do it well, which is content. Whether it's a content-based website or whether it's a task-based website, content becomes so important, because we are talking about content that is textual, imagery, video content, and we are also talking about instructional content. How do you help the users get to where they have to go very easily? That is also a part of the content that we're talking about. Chapter 11 is the final product. Okay, we spoke about all these fancy things. How do we put it all together in an interesting way to create a singular product that will be worth our while, and how we learn? And at some point of time when we are talking about chapter 3, empathy, who is the user, which is hopefully next week, it is important for us to kind of take a product idea. Fortunately, you already have one, Prashant. We can go with the Sedura idea itself, and we can actually take that through the entire idea of product definition, information architecture, interaction design, prototyping it, user testing it, and information visual designing it, and then defining the right kind of content on it, and create the final product that's appropriate for you to probably launch, right? And the last, chapter 12, is tools and techniques. And that is going to be the anatomy of what we are going to do over the next 50 hours. I mean, we are done with almost 2 hours. So 48 hours of our course. Any questions before we go to the first chapter, Prashant?
So regarding tools, is it different? We study only theoretical concepts and then we work on implementation part using tools.
So my belief is this. My belief is that the initial part that we need to actually do is stuff that we can do in pretty much anything. Like the prototyping, the building and stuff like that is something that is conceptually strong. So we can use Adobe Illustrator to do it. If you are comfortable with doing it in Axior, we can do it in Axior. Honestly, I am open for people to do it on PowerPoint because it is important for us to kind of get the concept and the structure right before you even get into the tools. So
Yes.
one of the strength of actually I see it as a strength of this course is that it conceptually readies you for user experience design, and tools like the name suggests are additive that you can use in fabulous ways to create your product better. So I'm not because keeping it open for everybody, I'm not going to say it as a prerequisite that you should know Adobe tools before you get into this course.
Okay.
Let's go on to chapter 1, using technology, right? So the most important stuff about technology and user experience is people. User experience is about people using technology than anything else, right? And that is something that we've got to kind of keep in mind. It is always about like small products that we actually have and become a part of our life, and and how we use those to create a whole bunch of things, like a personal computer to write a poem, internet to find a recipe for a cake or a book a ticket, right? The phone to reach a nearest pharmacy, which we use very easily. Smart watches and bands that we actually wear to track our fitness are all governed by this concept called as user experience. So that is something that we've got to, it's more about people than about technology. It's something that we've got to be clear about when we actually go to user experience design. So I constantly see it as a bridge that makes people use technology better. It actually bridges the gap between technology products that are complicated and intimidating, and makes it cohesive and compelling for users to kind of use them very well. But however, there are some truths about how we use technology. These are stuff that is really true. Like if you look at the screen now, truth number 1 is that when we actually go to the like, for example, the page like this, like newspapers, is one of the best methods to kind of think about how do we actually access information. We always scan, we don't read. Apparently, we use about, everybody, the average time of reading newspaper, a full newspaper across the world is 11 minutes. This is between like people like you and I who probably spend about 3 to 4 minutes reading newspaper or news. And my dad, who probably spends about 3 hours reading newspaper from morning till his lunchtime. So the important stuff that we need to know is that we most often scan and we don't dive deep into information. Most of the pages on the web and the apps on our devices assume that we read, but we do not. We specifically have an intent. We generally go to a website or an app with a very, very specific intent in our head, right? Like we want to accomplish a goal. So we constantly keep moving. There is an interesting method in which they say we muddle through. So you can build a very, very complicated experience, but the user will find a way to kind of muddle through, right, over a period of time. So we also intuitively know that everything on the screen is something that we do not need. So it's based on what you have in your head as an intent and what is the goal, end goal. So you will actually see only those things, click on those and keep moving. And we do find those things very easily, whether it's a small minimal site like a Google where there is white and one specific field right across the page, or whether it's IRCTC, which you and I use, I think, very often, which is probably the most complicated, messiest website front page that you would actually see, right? So, and that is something that we got to
Yes.
keep in mind. Like, so on the left, you see how the Google page looks, right? Like it's so simple, unbelievably clean. On the right is IRCTC, probably the best example to illustrate the idea that we actually cut through clutter and find our way through, right? Having said that, design will help me more, help us as users more to kind of find the path that we are trying to go through. So it is important to keep one thing in mind: intent. What is the intent and the goal that the user comes to the website for, right? And how does the user find the intent? Like, if I actually quickly talk about Sedura itself, if I actually go to the website homepage in Sedura, I should in some way know what it stands for, how can I get to it, and what I'll get at the end of it. It's a logic track. And that is something that you've got to give me upfront straight away so that I can jump into using it. So that is the larger thought about we scan, we do not read. So there is another fantastic truth about sufficient versus optimal, right? Again, it kind of connects to what the earlier stuff is, right? Let's talk a little bit about reaching a place. I don't know how bad the traffic is in Hyderabad, really. Bangalore is a nightmare, Prashant. It's especially the place I live. I live a little outside Bangalore in a place called Whitefield. So if I've got
I'm from Bangalore. I'm born in Bangalore. Yeah, I know that.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, Kannadiga
So,
only. Yeah.
oh, you're Kannadiga. Okay, great. So, like, you know, Whitefield, it's a nightmare if I have got to go anywhere, right? So constantly, like the most sufficient way to actually reach a place would be to reach there in time, right? Like, for example, I'm explaining this because you understand Bangalore well. For me to go to Koramangala, there are probably three ways in which I can reach Koramangala. I'm near the Varthur side of, I'm actually at Forum Mall side of Whitefield, right? So from there, if I've got to go, I can take the ring road. I can go around Varthur Kodi, go to Sarjapur Road and reach Koramangala, and so on. The most optimal route that I can take is actually the shortest, is actually go down the old airport road, hit Domlur and take a left and take the auxiliary ring road and reach Koramangala. That's the optimal. But honestly, I will be killed with the traffic. But the sufficient way is that I will do it in time, but I go around, which is probably about 8 kilometers longer, but it's a sufficient way. So it is important to know that we constantly trying to make choices that are sufficient and not necessarily optimal. It's the same when you actually do it in user experience. We are in a hurry. We are constantly, guessing and moving forward. So there is, and the important stuff is there is no penalty for guessing wrong, right? The guessing is more fun. People see it as more fun. But this truth completely depends on the kind of user environment and the frame of mind. One of the stuff that I actually illustrate constantly is this, right? So if you actually are standing in a place and you actually see somebody either hit by some moving car or a bus and it's an accident, and you are actually trying to get a hospital, nearest possible hospital, your mindset is very different from when you're actually trying to move into a place with probably your parents at home, and you are saying that are there some hospitals in the vicinity so that I can find a house where hospitals are. Your mindset is very, very different with both, right? And it's important to and the sufficient versus optimal changes for these two different mindsets. That's something that we got to keep in mind. Another important truth. When we say we, I'm talking about users here, right? Users do not know how things work. but we know what it does, right? As users, right? The main thing is that we do not need to know how it works. I mean, why do you need to know how like a clock works to wake you up in the morning? You don't need to. All you need to know is if I set the alarm, it will wake me up, right? If something does the job, we will comfortably use only that. We do not look for better ways until we kind of stumble across something that is way more interesting because a friend told you, or you read a life hack article or something where it says you can also do it this way, it is better this way, you can save time / money, which is the two things that we want to constantly save, by the way. We want to save time, we want to save money. So that is what I mean by, actually, you don't need to explain. Most often people tend to explain too much in terms of how things work. No, you need to explain what it does. And that's what is important for people. Like, I mean, we don't read instruction manuals anymore. We muddle along. We kind of figure it out, right? And then, especially when we work with technology, it takes us probably all of 10 minutes to get ready and up and running with the technology that we use these days, because the frameworks are already there in our head. Unless a new technology comes along, unless something new is going to be discovered. The first time we probably saw a smartphone, I mean, actually, if Steve Jobs hadn't gotten onto the stage and explained everything that happens on a smartphone, we would have looked at the screen and said, I don't understand what is happening, and hopefully tried it out, because again, there is no penalty in guessing, and we would have figured it out over the next 10-15 minutes, right? And it's but if you don't really take the instruction manual out and read in terms of what are the every inner workings of that stuff to actually use it. So that is the truth number 3. Truth number 4 is something that I actually indicated earlier, that usage has a grammar. Like I always believe that anything that is evolved through ages has a grammar, and that is a grammar that we need to know. Like, why do people say that you are good at English? It's because you actually learn grammar and syntax over time. You actually kind of figure the entire structure of how things are put together over time, and that you can replicate that very well. And like that, usage has a grammar. So language, technology, device usage, all have evolved to create a certain set of conventions or best practices, as we call it, which is the grammar. These are derived by experts who have understood this evolution over a period of time and actually kind of nicely documented it, or seen it as stuff that has got to be reused again and again. Like, one of the stuff is where things are located. Like, if you go to the Amazon app, on which you can see on the left hand side, the logo is on the left hand side. If you actually go to any other app that is probably a e-com app, the logo wouldn't move very far from where it is. So is the shopping cart on the right hand side top. That will be pretty much where the stuff is. It won't move very far from there. Like, how things work. Like, for example, a video. Like, when you watch a Seinfeld video in YouTube, you know that that triangle means it's a video and it's not a picture anymore. And you will know that if I actually press on that triangle, it will play. So that entire idea is a grammar that is predefined, and we've got to kind of understand this grammar. Over time, there are people defining this grammar more and more. There are questions constantly asked about, like, for example, in a form page, does left-aligned work or center-aligned work? We'll talk about this in detail a little later when we go to that stuff. So those are evolving grammars that people are trying to solve. Does a wizard work better? Wizard is like where, I don't know whether you understand what wizard means, which is like next, previous kind of boxes that actually lead you from one task to another. Does that work better, or a form work better, is something that people are trying to answer over time. but each one has got its own environment. Each one has got its own typical user intent and a goal that it's got to be applied to. So that is largely the truths of what we have in the usage, the idea of the usage. Now, what we're going to do is that we'll quickly visit some of the devices that we use on a daily basis and quickly talk about them a little bit. Let's go to some of the devices and how we use these devices. Let's look at desktops and laptops to start with, right? And tablets, right? Desktops are mostly used as workstations. I mean, very rarely do we use desktops at home. I mean, I'm on a laptop. I think are you on a laptop too?
Laptop, sir.
Yeah,
Laptop.
so most often we've actually switched to laptops, right? I think personal computing space is kind of taken over by laptop because it's so convenient and the pricing is not so complicated. And so we can easily, desktops are kind of moved off. And desktops are predominantly used as workstations in office environments because it kind of bothering, if the bother is about security, ability to hold data very tight and securely in one place, and so on, desktops are used. Or even workstations, which have got to be doubly, triply powerful than a laptop because it's got to do something way more complicated, like in my case, video editing. I have a desktop at home which I use predominantly for video editing and building way more complicated product pieces, right? So that is what I use desktops. I mean, even prototypes sometimes because it demands some complex things that can be put together. So that's desktops and laptops. Tablets, on the other hand, I mean, honestly, tablets, I think, have lost their value and appropriate application in users' mind. The sale is on decline, as you know, and people are trying to push it specifically into business. There are some specific business use cases where tablets are used, like especially in shop floors, probably interestingly to indicate or bring in enterprise application data to where you are. Like a nice use case to kind of talk about is like a shop floor engineer who wants to understand where your part is in an ERP application or a supply chain management application. And that part is while you're on a shop floor, you can easily handle and interact and respond to something on a tablet. So other than pacifying small children by giving a tablet and say, go play, or with in enterprises where you actually use this as a part of a large application, a legacy or an enterprise application, and your input can be actually seen in a tablet, it's not being used very much, right? So that is the desktops and tablets. Smartphones have become huge, right? India has had 1 billion mobile subscribers in 2016, and 36% of them is smartphones last year. 36% of that 1 billion. Can you imagine? It's a huge possible thing. And there is going to be 90% penetration of smartphone users. So it's important to kind of think, I mean, at one point, everybody said it's important to kind of think adaptive and responsive. But unfortunately, right now, we have changed our tack in saying that we've got to think mobile first. Even your product, which is Sedura, we probably need to think mobile first. And if it is administered, we've got to probably think of it as tablet first, that people can actually take this product to places in small villages and towns and wherever children are and administer this product to students, administer this product to the schools where you can go and do these tests, right? And that is kind of important to kind of think about. So smartphone is become way bigger than they're like pocket computers right now that we are actually kind of carrying and walking around. With smartphones, things have changed so much. We do not ask for directions anymore. We are always connected. We can buy things immediately. We are always informed and we are always entertained. So, I mean, and look at the kind of options that we have, like the map, the music, Netflix, and YouTube, the Amazon store that can sell you specific products or specific fashion. So immense amount of opening. And I know a whole load of people who are living on smartphone and not necessarily using anything else at all, because it doesn't demand anything more than that for them. And that's about smartphones specific. So then I'm actually going to watches and wearables after this, right? Watches and wearables are looked at as an extension of your phone and in sense you. So the important stuff with smartphones is it's actually become a kind of your identity in one sense, right? Your smartphone, your phone number and the ID of your smartphone has actually almost become your identity. And with actually the payment apps integrated to it and so on, it is you in one sense. And actually the phone, the watch has become the extension of your phone and you in one sense. The thing is that there is going to be a bizarre future in user experience design, and everybody is kind of worried about that future that is there, like where screens are going to go off. Everybody is talking about, hell, we don't have screens anymore. I mean, Alexa is a voice interface, and
Yes.
like Siri is a voice interface.
Voice
Or
interface.
the minute you go into AR and VR, we are actually looking at stuff where screens don't exist anymore. And like the interesting stuff is that they are saying in UI, the U actually stands for the person you. You are the interface is what actually it is going towards. Unfortunately, for the course, I've kept the screen stuff as the focus, because to be honest, even I do not know where the future is going to be headed. I'm, the closest that we can get to is right now, it is like probably the chatbots, which is still screen, but conversational UI. But the next level of the conversational UI is UI, which is voice user interface. And probably it goes off from voice interface to an augmented reality, to a virtual reality, and so on. So we'll keep to screens for the scope of this course, right? And so we spoke about the larger idea of devices, and what I want to do now is to kind of talk as an introduction to design thinking, because it's kind of very important for us to understand design thinking so that we can break it down, break the piece that we are doing down to an abstract framework before we actually start doing something tangible, clickable, and something that we call a product. So this design thinking framework, I mean, actually, when we studied design, nobody called it design thinking, because at that point it was called, simply thinking. Now design thinking is being applied for stuff that is not necessarily design as an industry. It is being applied, I mean, actually, technology companies like SAP, companies like, consulting companies like Deloitte are applying design thinking to applications that are way away from the standard idea of doing something creative alone, right? They are applying it to businesses. They are applying it to initiatives that are new in businesses. They are applying it to stuff that can be anything that has got an application of something that is creative, something that is innovative, and something that can be built over time, with the first piece that is the most important piece in design thinking is to empathize. The ability to kind of empathize with the user or the audience or the people who are the stakeholders who are going to be a part of this entire product or initiative that you're trying to build together. So empathy is a big piece. And if we, and then comes the idea of definition. How do you define your problem statement? How do you define your product? How do you define that the users need this product, right? And then you come to the concept of ideation. How do you ideate interesting methods in which you can put together something that is useful, usable, desirable for the users, and which kind of goes with the definition, which is actually the definition that you built for the product. That's the ideation. Once you ideate, how do you prototype it, which essentially means how do you build something tangible out of it without being very abstract and just theoretical and just talk about concepts. How can you actually put something together that can be tested? And it loops back. Actually, once you test and get a feedback and get a set of understanding, it loops back and comes back to the root of kind of empathizing again, redefining that product because you tested it, ideating again to fix those feedback that you actually got from the test, and prototyping it again so that you can test again. So it's a kind of a cyclical loop. And that is, interestingly, people are creating methods in which they can fail faster, they can do something, the prototypes faster, so they can test faster, so that they can fail faster, so that they can hopefully do a set of good iterative thingies that can eventually come up with a good product, right? So first we'll talk about ability to empathize. I think anything that is a human-centered design process. So the biggest difference between design thinking process versus any other process that we can think of is the human or the people, like I said earlier, is way more important than the technology, the product, or the business. Because design thinking believes if you apply your knowledge of people to your product or your technology or your business, you will automatically succeed, because all it helps you do is to gain more people to use your product, and gain more people to stay with your product, and gain more people to kind of pay or convert constantly, so that your product is feasible, right? So that is the empathize part of it, which is important. So how do you understand your users well? It's important to observe the users. Strangely, I've kind of used the example of children, which is probably appropriate for your product, Prashant. So how do you understand what they go through on a daily basis? How do you understand that this is the kind of mindset that they come to the school with, or to how do you understand that how urban children are different from that of rural children? How do you understand various groups of children from smaller age, middle school, high school to higher secondary school, and so on? Like that, it is that you can do it through observation. Observation is like you go sit down with students in classes, sit down in families with children, and make a set of observation and notes about how they go through. So some of the exercises that we do are stuff like day in the life of kind of stuff, where you kind of shadow a few kids right through the day and see what are they doing through the day. And it's probably an interesting way to understand the various things that they actually go through through the day, so that you can have a better understanding. So that's one observation method. Another observation method is kind of specific and blocking it down to areas. Like, for example, like if you say typical study habits. So if you actually look at study, are they using books? Are they using television programs? Are they using YouTube instructional guides? Are they using any other online programs to learn? How do they actually view their future and career? These are something that you can actually observe and understand through specific boxed focus areas. Then the second part is engage. It's actually start interacting with. So it's like you can do through small interviews, or I mean, whether it is through like small surveys, or actually sit down interviews, or even focus groups. That is actual engaging, right? Um, Immerse is a little more deeper than that. Immerse is actual immersion with the children themselves. Like I said, it's a shadow of, it's not just observation, but do what they do for a period of time, so that you kind of understand how complicated, or how, so it's not observation, it is immersion. So that is experience what your user experiences. In children's case, it's probably a little difficult. It's easier when in other cases where, you know, you got to be a shopper for a while, you got to be a technology coder for a while, you got to be an interesting. So one of the interesting projects that I have in mind, that if anybody does not have a project, is that is like city guides, right? If we actually create interesting city guides, right? So if we want to be a guide ourselves, right, to understand, or if you want to be guided through a city, how will we, you know, go through? So being tourists in our own cities, or being tourists in other cities, is a great method in which you can kind of immerse yourself, take notes, video notes, and kind of, and that creates this empathy. That's first part. That is the most important first part of this entire design thinking process. I'm going to stop here, quickly ask you if there are any questions, or even any comments that you have on the concept of empathy.
As I understood, empathy is all about like observing the users, how they're like understanding their requirements clearly.
Yeah, fair enough to say that, but it's, I guess, a little more than that. It is about
Engaging.
rather than saying observe. So it's about observe, engage, and immerse yourself from the users. But in a
Yes.
product or a development thing, right? Like you almost become user advocate. So you know that in my opinion, a product team or a development team is broken into three parts. Like there is a technology team, there is a business team, and there is a design team, right? Like, or the creative team, if I can actually call it a creative team, which is the user experience team. So the technology, we will visit that as we go further into this stuff anyway. The technology team always thinks about, sorry, let me start with the business. The business team always think about return of investment and understanding the domain or the industry that you are doing the product in. The technology team is constantly bothered about the performance and the feasibility of the product, right? Like, will it work? Won't it work? That's what they are bothered about. Like this, it's simply put, the business is bothered about viability, which is this a viable business? Okay, if I actually put in X amount of money, how much will I get back? It's what they are bothered about, and they understand the industry very well. If I actually go to the technology team, they understand the technology very well. They are bothered constantly about how well will it actually perform? Will it fail in miserable ways, or will it keep working well? And if it does keep working well, what will work well? So what are the features and functionality that will stand up and stay and not give up on for the users? And the third part, which is the design part, are user centric. They are the guys who are actually bothered about usability and user and the brand and the emotional aspect of it. So that those guys become, that is probably you and I, after we go through this entire course, we will become the user advocates. We will actually tell, like in meetings, when you're actually discussing feature functionality list, the business will typically come up with a feature, and the technology will say, the business will come up with a feature saying that the industry has this kind of a requirement, so we'll be using this feature. Technology will say whether it's a possibility or not, or how can we actually build it. But the user will say, usability will say, will the user like it or not? what do you think will the user adapt to that feature or not? And that is kind of important at every possible level, right? Like, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. Prashant, I'm just going to move to another location because my power is draining out while we are talking about this. So that is the usability and the user experience part of the stuff is what we need to focus on as a part of this empathy as a process, right? That is something that we've got to keep in mind. That's all I wanted to kind of indicate about empathy. I mean, this is a grounded, good concept, and it's an introductory concept that we've got to constantly keep in mind as we go through this entire course. And it's not for today or tomorrow, it's forever. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. The second thing that we need to focus on is definition. Okay, so you actually went and met the users, you actually observed them, you engaged with them, you immersed yourself with them in some way, and you actually brought a lot of information in one sense that are kind of loose, if you know what I mean. They are all lying all over the place. How do you actually unpack the entire information, put it together as a set of needs and insights, and actually scope out a product, right, that is appropriate for your users, right? So two goals of the define mode are to, one, develop a deep understanding of your users by actually bringing out the insights and the space in which you are actually defining the design, and based on the understanding, come up with a set of actionable problem statements where you can say, like, it's probably good to kind of say that, like, the problem statement in your case is I'm guessing, is it possible to kind of now, can you state the problem statement for your product itself?
The problem statement is we are having a few, set of questions like psychological questions where we are asking them to take the test, and based on the test, we are having a predefined frameworks. We are categorizing them.
No, not that. That's not what I mean. Like, what is the reason for your product to exist? Why do you think that is the problem statement? Like, you will actually say, like, for example, you can say that children today do not understand their SWOT, right? Like, basically their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's important for them to identify them very well so that they can pursue a career that is appropriate. Like, that could be a potential problem statement. I don't know whether I got your product right or not.
But yeah, it's a career map tool, sir, actually.
Yeah. So I'm saying that will be a problem statement of sort.
Yes.
But once you understand your user, you will define it even tighter. Like, you will say in middle school, it is like this. But as you go to high school, it becomes like this. As you go to higher secondary, it becomes like this. And once you move to college education or graduation kind of stuff, it becomes more like this. And you'll get very, very definite about your product, what you're building itself as a scope and a meaningful challenge. So do you get what I mean by defining a problem statement now?
Yes, sir, clear.
Cool, great. Then we talk about ideation. So there are things that they say about two things, right? Like, one is, I'm just exposing you to some other thinking ideas. Like, if I go back to define, so we actually collected a whole load of data in the entire idea of immersion and in the entire idea of observation and blah blah blah, and actually we converged that data to a definition of a problem statement. It's an actionable problem statement or your point of view, right? So that entire process is called as a convergent thinking process, right? If I actually go to ideate, arising from that problem statement given in that context, you think about every possible idea that can solve your problem, right? And then that is called as the divergent thinking, right? It is to explore a wide solution space. Like, what can we do? So one of the stuff that you actually, considering the problem is this, one of the stuff that you thought was, people, children don't understand their potentials in a proper way. It's probably good for them to have a career guide, or even a career counseling in some way. One of the ideas is to actually have a survey, a method in which somebody can actually take a bunch of things, and then you will say the survey could be in form of a game, the survey could be in form of a questionnaire, the survey could be in form of something else, and that is the width of ideation. You will ideate in every possible way of how you can collect information from this children, so that you can give them or suggest a career path that is important. And then the next thing is, of course, prototyping. Ability to take all those ideas and explorations out of your head into a tangible physical world. So one of the stuff that we need to understand is that a prototype need not be always technologically built clickable prototype. It could be a wall of post-it notes that you actually put in front of the user and tell the users, listen, sort this out for me, right? I want, like, best thing to say is that, like, these are all the ideas that we have, and bring in the user and say, sort this entire stuff out for me, because I need to kind of put it in a proper structure, put it in a proper way, so that we can actually see this as a prototype. That is a post-it note prototype. A role-playing activity could be this. Like, for example, you actually have somebody ask a set of questions. If you are a career guide, what are the set of questions that you will ask this person who is actually looking for career guidance, right? And you will ask a role-playing activity. You will gain a lot as a prototype from this activity. So it could be actually a small theatrical performance that you actually create, and you can collect feedback. You can make a space, an object, an interface, or even a storyboard. So all of these are prototypes. Anything that you can gather feedback from is a potential prototype. So typically for user experience design, we actually do paper prototypes, things that are drawn on paper. I mean, we can test it at multiple places. So we actually do paper prototypes. We actually do on-screen, non-clickable pages. You can actually put it in front of the user and ask questions like, what do you see? What can you gain? And so on. And then you can actually go to clickable prototypes, then partial product itself prototypes, where you can actually give a test goal. Like, one of the stuff that we did for Big Basket as a test is, before we built the product as a user test, is that we actually created short shopping lists that we gave to people along with gift vouchers, and told them to shop. I want you to shop these 5 things. And they are very, very specific. Okay. So it will actually have a brand name. Like, like, it will say Ashirwad Chakki Atta 5 kg pack, that has got an offer on it, has got to be added to your cart, along with this and this and this and this, very specific list. And you actually get them to do it. And that is the extreme of prototyping and testing that actually takes us and makes us understand all the complication of search and a browse and even content, or how, like, the 5 kg pack and the 10 kg pack in the picture looks the same. How do you actually differentiate between the 5 kg and the 10 kg? In the place where the stuff is written as 5 kg and 10 kg, it is not visible enough. How do you actually make someone understand that better? The offer or the bonus that we're actually putting over the product is not clear enough. How do you actually indicate that better for the user? And those kind of stuff is what you gather out of prototyping and out of that testing, which we actually go to next. Is a prototype is, you got to prototype it as if you know you are right, but constantly test as if you know you're wrong, right? So that's what you need to do always. So testing is the chance to get feedback on your solutions, refine to make them better, and continue to learn about your users constantly is what the stuff is all about. I think that kind of takes us to the end of this intro in total, Prashant. So what will be nice is to kind of what will be nice is for me to kind of do a quick summary of where all we went and what all we did today. Yeah, so we visited this entire idea of why do we need to know about user experience, who will benefit from this course, both from a design team perspective and from a technology team perspective. We actually went through the entire set of chapters and kind of understood all the stuff that we're going to go through over this course. We specifically deep dive into using technology as a concept. We understood how user experience is about people using technology. We visited those 4 truths. It's about scan and don't read, sufficient versus optimal, the idea of we know what it does but don't need to know how things work. We also talked about how usage has a grammar, like how language has a grammar. And we also talked about all the specific devices that we use today, starting from desktop, laptops, tablets, smartphones, and the strength of smartphones themselves, and watches and wearables. And we actually walked through the introduction to design thinking, talked about empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing in depth. And we will also talk further a little bit about what is the potential project that we can, or a problem area that we can think about solving. And I think in your case, you already have a problem area that is interesting enough. Thanks, Atan. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being around.
See you tomorrow.
We'll meet again tomorrow.
Okay. Bye.
See ya.
Acadgild. Average is dead.